Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Lore Diver, where I'm your host, Graham, and I'll be going through the lore of various role playing games and digging into what it is, what it means, and how you can improve your game with it. And so today we are starting with Chult, the peoples of Chult. It's a region in Forgotten Realms, the Dungeons and Dragons setting. And yeah, why? Well, you know what? Chult is probably one of the most fascinating locations in the game. It has a completely unique mix of characters or potential races, and yeah, I think that it's an area that needs better exploration and more information. So we're going to be starting out, talking about the different races that are available. Then we're going to talk about the main group, humans, and that should eat up most of the time for this first podcast. What's available? Wow. Okay, Chult has a lot of stuff going on. It's awesome. Can't recommend it enough. The races that are available, like just right off the top of my head, there's several different ethnic groups of humans. There are wild elves. There are wild dwarves. There are albino dwarves. There are lizard folk, Yuan Ti, Grung, goblins. What else? I think that's and the salamander people there. So it's got a nice wide selection of things that are available to play, and as a result, it's close to but not quite the same as a more conventional adventuring location for Dungeons and Dragons. And so the first thing we're going to be talking about is humans, as I said, and we're going to start talking about Chultans. And the first thing I'm going to say about the Chultans, just right off the hop, is they are not a single ethnic group. There's actually three major groups inside of it, and if you treat them as one group, you kind of get the result that's in the Tomb of Annihilation book. They're there, but if you treat them as their separate ethnic groups, the whole setting gets a lot cooler really fast. And so let's look at the history in the editions of Chultans. So things are squidgy, for lack of a better term. In the first edition, Chultans are presented only in one book, and it's a book about Kalimshan. It's almost a throwaway set of sentences in a description of the larger political and social situation in Kalimshan. But what it outlines is that at that point in first edition, even though Chult was just a little spot on the bottom of the map with absolutely no description of it past jungle, that the Kalshites actually considered them to be a serious threat. That they were, like a political and economic threat to their regime. And I think that's pretty awesome, because that's something you don't see very often in games. And this all changes in second edition, of course. Second edition is a whole lot of like pulp fiction, Africa nonsense, and it's just not a great scene at all. It's a case of where research goes wrong. In the effort to try to get something right, they research something so hard that it just does not work. And so there were a few things that came out of that were all right. That being, Mesro was established as a center of learning and peace, one of the largest and most well-educated, peaceful cities in the realms, period. And even though there were a lot of problematic aspects to it, the information about the Chultans themselves, the different groups, and how they lived was actually pretty good. Like, they offered a few pages. They even have like a drawing of like how a village layout is. And it may not sound like much, but if you're any sort of like an anthropology or sociology nerd or anything else like that, seeing stuff like that, you're like, oh yeah, like that's awesome, right on. And it had that. So that was good. Third edition, for all intents and purposes, the Chultans didn't exist. There's nothing about Chult directly. There's lots of stuff, though, about their neighbors on the peninsula. And that's where it got cool, because it actually went into a lot about the third not so talked about ethnic group of Chultans, the Thinguth. And there's lots of areas that end in Guth, especially in Thindol, Samrach, that area. And that's for a reason, and we'll get into that in a moment. But it was pretty cool. But you had to dig for the information, which is always a less than ideal situation. The 4th edition was all bad all the time. What's a good way to describe it? Racism o'clock. That is a good way to describe the 4th edition in Chult. Chult got smashed. Mesro was destroyed and cast down. Everything was undead. It described the locals as noble savages and depraved cannibals, and that's actually a quote out of the book. That's not me paraphrasing or trying to make it sound worse than it is, and gave no information on how to play a Chultan, like, at all. They were just literally background in your jungle adventure. And then they dropped like a Mesoamerican step pyramid temple into the middle of the place. It was a bad scene. Nothing good in 4th edition. 5th edition, we got a partial restoration. Still some problematic aspects, but it was a big step forward, especially after 4th. The Tomb of Annihilation greatly expands on the region, and they did a lot of great stuff there. They gave it more history, more occupation, more history of occupation, more people, and then it sort of made it a dead area, because almost everything was in ruins, and there's only really sort of like one city that's functioning and 2 forts. So a few problems there, and we'll get into that when we're more into the hot take section of this, on how you might be able to like spice things up a little bit in your game. I'd be remiss right now not to mention, if you want to get a more complete idea about my ideas about 5th edition Chult, check out my blog. There's a 4-post long series that I did about that book, and it was probably the most writing I've done outside of like college, university. Anyways, so let's talk about humans in Chult, because damn, they are awesome. Wow. Okay, so human occupation in the area that is now known as Chult goes all the way back to the Days of Thunder. So we're talking like minus 30,000 or more Dale Reckoning time. So they are way back in time. They aren't doing much. They're living that Paleolithic life, dodging dinosaurs, monsters, and watching out for the creator races, which are running around at the time. These are like, I think it's called the Prince of Batrachi, the Saruk, the Eri, who eventually create the Aarakocra and all that sort of stuff. So they're basically spending all their time trying not to die, because for some reason the gods aren't really paying attention to humans yet. They got other stuff going on, I guess. And they're living this life. They survived the Tearfall event, which is a really bizarre event. There's a whole lot of back and forth in the resources about what caused it. Some parts of it say that it's the Sun Elves and the Sundering, with it going back and forward through time. Other resources say that it was a rain of dragon eggs from space. Others were that the Batrachi, who were losing a war against a bunch of other groups, let some primordials loose, and one of them threw an ice moon at the planet. And so, you know, not a great place to be at that point. And this is around minus 31,000, minus 30,000 this happens. And the real world equivalent is would be like the end of the dinosaurs sort of thing when this event occurs. You've got drastic climate change, and a lot of the creator races begin the swan song of their civilizations at this point. But they will soldier on until minus 17,600 DR, when everything goes sideways for humans in the area. Now, a thing to remember here, okay? This is the only part of the Forgotten Realms in all the lore that I've been able to lay my dirty little hands on that has humans listed as occupants of the land going back that far. Most places do not have that. Most places are only going back, you know, like it sort of like kicks off well after like elves are on the scene, that sort of thing. And elves are the dominant group. These humans have been there the entire time. Like they're like that's where they are from, insofar as I'm able to tell. But Sun Elves, the villains of the Forgotten Realms, as I have discovered, have decided in minus 17600 DR that, you know what? We found this awesome prophecy, and it says we're supposed to have a homeland here. The Dark Elves, who are sensible, say, hey guys, we have it good already. Why mess this up? We're pretty sure the prophecy also mentions that if we do this, everything will go wrong. The Sun Elves are like, screw you guys, we're going to do whatever we want, and cause the Sundering. The Sundering tears the planet apart and separates out the humans that are living in the area that is now Chult. The bulk of them get swished to the west, with that landmass becoming Katashaka. And Katashaka is a named but undescribed continent in the Forgotten Realms. It's largely believed to be the large continent to the general southwest area of the map, across from Faerun, and that's where the bulk of them end up. The remainder are still in Chult. They're still in the peninsula, and they rapidly become prey for everybody in the region. Because again, for some reason, gods aren't paying attention to humans yet. Ubtao, who is the god of Chult, he's not paying attention to them. And the Yuan Ti and the Sarak begin using them as slaves and probably food. It's a bad scene for the humans that are left behind. However, as I've talked about elsewhere, I also see it as a very solid argument that a whole lot of other areas in that area should be black, as opposed to just Chult and the Tashlar area. But that's a different podcast. We'll do that a different day. So, Ubtao. How to describe him? Ubtao is the worst god in the Forgotten Realms. Like, bar none. I'm pretty sure that like Umberlee and Talona and Tiamat are actually more consistent deities than Ubtao is. Ubtao had his lore updated in 4th edition to be a primordial who turned against the primordials and sided with the gods in a giant battle, and was given Chult as his sole dominion. Ubtao doesn't have any interest in humans at all until he needs them to fight his war for him. And this is because the Sarak and their Yuan Ti creations have been pushing westwards along the Chultan Peninsula and bringing their god, the World Serpent, and later Set, or Set, I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, with them. And he doesn't want them in his territory. So first he summons up a whole bunch of coatls, and that's a whole different story in of itself. And he's using them to fight. Meanwhile, all the humans are just dodging dinosaurs and dodging all these fights and trying not to die. And finally, things get to the point where it's at a stalemate, and then all of a sudden all of his coatls start to die. And then Ubtao decides at that point, he's like, hey guys, I really need someone to fight this war for me. So I could use the humans that are here already, or not. I'll send my coatls across the sea and see if they'll find anyone who'll join up. And so the coatls go across the sea, and this is all sitting at it's around not 4,000, sorry. This is around minus 2,000 or so. Fortunately, I didn't write that date down, so don't quote me on that, but it's around minus 2,000 or so. And Ubtao sends his little coatls across the sea. They get out there and they start looking around, trying to find anybody who will worship Ubtao and come fight a war for him. And this is not exactly a great offering, because Ubtao has already declared that he will not be, as he terms it, a house god. So he doesn't want to be a deity in the sense that the other deities in Forgotten Realms work. And in 2nd edition, this meant that he didn't grant a lot of spells. And to be honest, his afterlife is awful. If you worshipped Ubtao back in the day and you died, you had to answer a riddle, which was like they'd lay out this maze in front of you and ask you if there's anything in it that you'd like to change or any path that you would have rather taken. And if you answer wrong, you got sent back to your soul got destroyed and you got sent back to the planet as an undead monster to haunt the jungles. Like, and not minor things like zombies. Like, we're talking like ghasts and whites and stuff like that. Like that's how he rolled. So he is like the worst god. It doesn't even give a decent afterlife. Got a comment here. He was listed as true neutral. Yeah, he is. There was a thing in second edition where when something was evil, but they didn't want to have it as evil, they would give it true neutral as an alignment. I'm pretty sure that's what happened there. So, anyways, he finally a few tribes over in Katashaka, they get interested. They're like, okay, we're having monster problems. What can you do for us? And so he creates the first Bare. You will not find much information about Bare in any edition except for second. And that is because no sane DM wants to let a player ever see that this is an option. The Bare are effectively super paladins. Like, they're sitting somewhere between paladin and demigod for power level. And so instead of having like a huge clergy or like a bunch of paladins, he just sort of has a handful of Bare, and they do the bulk of his work. And each one is immortal unless killed, and has some superpower. For example, Raznisi in the Tomb of Annihilation, it's not mentioned much in that book, but his power was to raise an unlimited number of and control an unlimited number of undead. He could on a battlefield, he could raise every single dead person, animal, and thing on it, and then command them. Like, that's the level of powers that he gives out to his Bare. Anyway, so he gives the Tabaxi, before they were cat people, they were a tribe. He gives the Tabaxi a Bare. He defeats a monster, and 3 major tribes and a bunch of minor ones sign up. They're like, yep, we'll come fight your war. We'll worship you. Go Team Ubtao. Anything is better than being here right now. So they all get into their canoes and row into a mist and appear an unspecified amount of time later on the shores of Chult. And this is where things go rapidly sideways. Because all 3 groups were brought in to fight this war, and only one actually ended up fighting it. And that was the Thinguth. Now, the Thinguth, they are one of my favorite groups out of this lot, and that is because they said, hey, we're here to fight a war against a bunch of serpent people, and that's exactly what they did for like 2,000 years. It is as far as I can tell, it's the longest continuous conflict that any human civilization in the realms has ever been involved in. And it was the Thinguth going toe-to-toe with the Yuan-Ti, Lizardman mercenaries, and all that crazy serpent magic and everything else like that, and holding the line. Like, they pushed out of Chult into what is now Thindol and successfully held that area. And that's wild to me. Like, that is, you don't see that anywhere else. But they fought that war. However, the other 2 major groups that came over, the Eshowe and the Tabaxi, they weren't as keen on fighting. The Tabaxi, they went from 0 to theocracy in a heartbeat. Like, they were actually under direct rule by Ubtao, making them I think only like 3 civilizations in the game that were actually like that. Most were, had like occasional divine inspiration or something like that, but they were actually under direct divine rule by Ubtao. And he built Mesro for them. Like, didn't, not like in the sense of like, here's the plans, get cracking, as in like, here's your city, enjoy. And he ruled them like for centuries and centuries and centuries. That's what their life was. The Eshowe, on the other hand, there's very little information in the lore about them. What I've been able to piece together, based on their actions during the Shoei Tabaxi War, is that they seem to have developed an affinity for arcane magic, and gotten really good at it, like tremendously good at it, like to the point where I would argue that they were magical wise, they probably sat somewhere around Imaskar's level, possibly starting to approach Netherils, and that's solely based on some of the magical stuff left over in Orolungo in the TOA, which I believe was an Eshowe city, and so they're doing their own thing, and the two of them are sort of like they help a little bit with the fight. Basically enough that Thinguth can, as I said, they'll hold the line, but not enough that they can actually like overrun or just wipe out the Yuan Ti. And this all goes great right up until the Ubtao gets bored, is what it is. I can't describe it a better way. Ubtao gets bored, pulls pin, and leaves. And no warning, no nothing, leaves part of his essence in the ground itself, like in Chult, and he's just gone. His essence is left behind to, let his handful of clerics who gets granted spells cast their spells, and that's it. This sends the Tabaxi into just a frenzy. They don't know why Ubtao's gone, and this is getting a bit into speculation here, because there's very little detail on the Eshowe Tabaxi War, but my guess is that they blamed the Eshowe for it. And the reason I suspect that is because, in theory, Ubtao was supposed to have sole dominion over Chult. He was not paying attention to the Thinguth very much. He was not paying attention to the Eshowe very much. He was giving all his love to the Tabaxi. So I suspect the Eshowe had turned to other gods. And the Tabaxi blame the loss of their god on this fact, and war. And this war rages for over 100 years. It's a brutal conflict that leaves ruins all over the place, which is, as I said, one of the good things that you see in 5th edition is, the expansion. There's Omu, Orolungo, Mbala, all these other places. There's the Firefinger signal system, all that sort of stuff. That's all fantastic because it shows that there were multiple groups doing more than just hiding in Mesro and trying not to die in the jungle. They were active and doing things. And so the war kicks off, and it goes from 0 to war crime in about 15 seconds. To their credit, the Eshowe have, and this is one of the reasons I believe their magical power is so high, they're able to hold off, because I think there's 12 Bare at any given point, and they're able to maintain a stalemate conflict with the Tabaxi, despite the Tabaxi having this tremendous advantage with divine magic users. So they're doing their thing, they're fighting their war. During this, the Thinguth finally fall. What little support they were getting from the Eshowe and Tabaxi dries up because they're busy murdering each other in the jungle, and the Thinguth are finally defeated and enslaved by the Yuan Ti. And they're actually treated, for the rest of the books, they're actually treated like second-class, third-class citizens in like every area, because they fought the Yuan Ti. And it's one of those things that doesn't make any sense to me, because everyone hates the Yuan Ti, and these dudes are out there like fighting them 24/7. And everyone's like, oh yeah, those guys are jerks. Yeah. I'm like, really? Like, ugh. But the Thinguth fall. And finally, again, reading between the lines, a little bit of speculation here. I suspect what happened next was the fall of Orolungo. And I believe that the Tabaxi finally managed to destroy that, the Eshowe capital. This puts the Eshowe on a back foot, and they decide to go full on and get whatever powers they can. And they successfully raise Ubtao's shadow out of the ground. So they now have a magically powered divine monster shadow thing to lead their assault on Mesro. And they actually assault Mesro. And the forces in Mesro, all the Bari, are just barely able to harm this shadow giant enough that it drives it back, and in its pain, it kills a whole bunch of the Eshowe troops. And at this point, Raz Nisi, who I brought up earlier, remember the guy who had the ability to raise an unlimited amount of undead and control them? Yeah. So he raised every single dead person on the battlefield. So tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of dead. And sends them into the jungle to murder every Eshowe they can lay their hands on. So, like if you look at the maps of Chult, in the bottom you see the Valley of Lost Honor. That was the last strong point where the Eshowe civilian population was en masse. And he killed them all. Like, all of them. And it became the thing that like nobody in Mesro ever talked about. They're like, oh yeah, we killed the Eshowe died in the war. That's it. End of story. He massacred them all. Like 100% fatalities. You can infer in the writing that some Eshowe did successfully escape. Yeah, great comment again. Exactly. We don't want to talk about it. Yeah. So they get out of there, and there's rumors constantly that some Eshowe survived. And I believe this is plausible, because there were all those other little micro-tribes that I was talking about. Groups don't just live beside each other, they intermingle. So there's a good chance that a lot of Eshowe escaped into those groups, basically took off their markings and clothes that showed they were Eshowe, threw on their cousin stuff, and just laid low. And this would lead to a constant paranoia in the Tabaxi culture that persists into 5th edition now, into I think it's like 1491 or 1492 DR. This is over 1,000 years later that there are still Eshowe out there who are plotting revenge and who will destroy the Tabaxi and in revenge for this horrifying act. So, yeah, that was the Eshowe Tabaxi War. Next up, we're almost done the history bit here. Just an interesting point, and that is the Shun Empire failed to conquer them. The Shun Empire, for those not tracking, was the largest extent that that Kalimshan ever got to, and it covered pretty much, I don't know, I'd say it was a good almost 1/6 of Faerun at one point or another. Like they're out into the Shar, they had the entire Chultan Peninsula, all that sort of stuff. They could not conquer Chult though. Chult remained sovereign and largely unaffected by them, which I thought was pretty interesting. The next one is the Spell Plague. Spell Plague, so it's 1385 DR, destroys Mesro. The description is that it seems like Mesro was lifted up and then dropped into a hole that appeared in the ground several hundred feet. The whole thing shattered, and I'm guessing, given the description of all the undead that are there, pretty much everybody failed their tests with Ubtao. So that's good times. And now finally, modern day, it's now 1491, 1492. I'm not sure what the year is. They're sort of not giving out all that information yet. But this is where we see Port Nyanzaru is ascendant. That's the main cultural and economic hub of the of the region now, because everything else is still rebuilding, and we don't have any information yet on the Chultan Peninsula. We see that Am, no, can never pronounce that right. They are the major trade partner with them, which makes sense because Am came out of the Spell Plague era more or less smelling like roses, whereas Kalimshan and all the other trade partners that had previously more or less got smashed up pretty bad. So, yeah, Amn is more or less in charge. The Tabaxi are the dominant group, and yeah, this brings us neatly into the current state of the campaign setting, and there's as presented in the Tomb of Annihilation. The peoples of Chult are effectively a vassal state of Am. They have no infrastructure, no local agency, no industry. There's no internal anything in the within Chult anymore because everything is, as I said, was in ruins, and it's just not a great scenario. I mean, even the like potential hooks that are offered throughout the book are quite weak. I mean, you know, you've got a princess living with the Aarakocra, and you know, it's like, yeah, she'd like to reconquer her kingdom. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. Tell me more. What's going to happen? And it goes on to tell you how it's probably a dream because everything's awful and smashed, and there's only her. And I was like, that's kind of a downer. Like, that's not a great way to sort of like build up potential for adventure. And you know, they aren't really doing much about this whole death, resurrection thing not working anymore, which you'd think they'd be all about, but no. And you know, the Yuan Ti are infiltrating back in, but what's a few serpent people, capturing everything. So now the fun part. My take on how you could add some more fun into the region, turn it into more than just a stop for dinosaur racing, which, while cool, isn't something you can base an entire campaign around, or even really something that a lot of people are going to want to base a character around for campaigns outside of the region, and how to like breathe some life into it. So let's get on with the living Chult here. So first off, let's make the place alive. Let's get some stuff going on. So the Eshowe always hinted at, being there somewhere in the background, waiting to like stab the Tabaxi in the back or some junk like that. So why not actually have them be active? Have the Eshowe as being resurgent. Give them some agency. And, like they're actually coming out of the woodwork. Like all these groups that have been hiding for centuries upon centuries now are coming out, and they're trying to reclaim their civilizations. They're what is in effect at this point a lost civilization. You can add an internal strife with them. You could say that they're having an internal schism between those who are looking to actually have that final revenge on the Tabaxi, who are now all in Port Nyanzaru, guarded by mercenaries who are going to be loyal right up until the gold stops flowing or until the earth starts eating people. And those who are want to rebuild a fresh nation, who without the hatreds of the past. And where I would put them is I would center them in Mbala. Okay, change it from being a ruin that was somehow destroyed by a single hag. Like, I don't understand that. Like, that's mind-boggling. That's like saying, like, I don't know, a zombie defeated a castle. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. But so Umbala's alive. It's a living kingdom. We'll call it the Marsh Kingdom, and you can find members of the Eshowe exploring other locations and trying to recover magical artifacts in the western parts of Chult, and especially in the ruins of Orolungo, which was their capital city in the past. Yeah, exactly. Great question there. Yeah, wait, what? This must have been one powerful hag. Yes. Apparently the most powerful hag in the realms. Took down the whole kingdom. I don't even know how that works. But in this case, it's just a kingdom. There are hags. They're on a marsh. There's lobster people. And it's full of the Eshowe who are trying to, get back on top. They're trying to recover magic. They're trying to do all that sort of stuff. Next up, the Tabaxi. Okay, adapting to life without Ubtao. Okay, Ubtao has, not only is he gone, but like the main city is smashed, and it is crazy stuff's going on here. Oh, we got a question. Oh yeah, you're in the lobster people, right? Yes, the lobster people in the marsh. The weirdest entry, and I think it was second editions when they came out. Don't understand why they're there. Not really doing anything, but they're there. Lobster folk. Weird. So the Tabaxi, yeah, they are adapting to life without Ubtao. They're still the most pious of all the Chultan groups, but I, based on the way they're acting in the book and in the stories, I would say that Joaquin and Volker are probably going to be their leading deities, because they're all about trade, and the only way their trade's getting out is by sea. So they've got that mercantile street going on. They're currently building their own trade vessels and a navy. Why? Because the place is full of pirates, and not only that, but if they want to be able to trade and not just take whatever Amn has to give to them and like it or lump it, they're going to be able to need to protect themselves, pardon me, against privateers, because that's how Amn's going to roll. Like, the moment they think that their trade's going to be threatened, they're going to flood that area with privateers and try to force the port to behave itself. So they need a navy, they need trade ships. And this opens up a whole bunch of opportunities. Like, this is reasons for Chultans to be found in Waterdeep, to be found up in Neverwinter, all those sorts of like places where you have expert shipwrights, and they're going to be offering like, top dollar, top gold, I don't know, to these guys to come down and get their shipbuilding industry going. And they've literally got a jungle filled with hardwood ready to go that is, set and ready to deal against having to, top dragon. Yeah, makes sense. They've got they've got teak and all these other sorts of stuff, so they don't have to worry about shipworms eating into their bottoms and stuff like that. They can establish a navy, they're trying to get this up. And then, as just a little bit of extra fun, they're also negotiating heavily with Lantan in secret to try to gain an edge over their old colonial masters, because Lantan's back. They've got submersibles and all sorts of crazy stuff. And for those not tracking, Lantan is an island in a subtropical zone that is occupied by humans that are described as, if the real world equivalent would be super pale, red-headed Irish people. So I think that their lives are probably an eternal living hell under a tropical sun, which is why they have designed and built so many crazy inventions. And these are the sorts of things that the Tabaxi would be trying to get a hold of to get an edge over the people from Amn. And finally, you got the Thinguth. Now, the Thinguth, they are recovering. They've had a tough time, and while they were defeated in battle, they've never been broken. No group has ever managed to successfully break them, which probably has something to do with, that 2,000 odd years of nonstop combat against the Yuan-Ti. They're probably really good at not breaking at that point. And for them, I actually put their last city as Omu. And the reason being that it makes the trickster gods make more sense, because you've got the Thinguth are already being ignored by Ubtao. Ubtao leaves. The people are going to be more open to this sort of thing coming in and offering itself, and so that makes sense, a little bit better sense, at least to me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 2,000 plus years is still ready to throw down. Exactly. So Omu is their last city, but instead of having it be like abandoned and just full of monsters and stuff like that, I see it as a city that is falling. That it's a city that needs to be saved instead of just adventured through. And this, there's riots going on. There's monsters stalking the streets at night. The Yuan-Ti have gotten in. The royal family is in disarray. They've given the heirs to the family to the Aarakocra to protect. Aarakocra? No. Anyways, they're given their heirs over to them to be protected. So that's why they're up in that area. So that's making more sense now. as they're trying to get a grip on what's happening here. Unfortunately, the Yuan Ti, they are just powering through right now. The reason being that there's like no opposition in the Chultan or any of the border regions anymore, and so the Yuan Ti see this as a chance to try to get Serpentes, their kingdom, which is in the Black Jungle on the peninsula, back on top. And so they need more magic, they need more power, they need more human slaves to do stuff. So why not hit a city that's already in disarray? And so all that stuff's going on in the city, and yeah, so now you have the Thinguth, who are probably getting ready to march to war again, even while their city is falling apart, because can't have Yuan Ti in the area. That's never good. Never works out as well as you would hope. And so yeah, that's how I see at least the Chultans operating inside of Chult. So other now for the the quieter part, less exciting now. After the hot take, what are the other human groups that are there? Kalimshan. Kalishites are still major traders in the area, and having that slightly Arab influence and North African influence on Port Nyanzaru makes a lot of sense if they're trading heavily and having that cultural exchange going on with Kalimshan. And so I see Kalishites as being a growing factor in the area. Like they're historically a big trade partner, and they're trying to get back into it. They're getting back into that area again, doing things again, trying to possibly even reestablish their old trade outposts and trade colonies along the peninsula. So they're there. Amnians, I see them as probably not the most liked group in Chult, largely because they are the former colonial masters of Port Nyanzaru, and they are the current dominant trade partner. And based on what I know about Amn from other works, in particular Mazda, they are terrible colonial powers. Not that any are particularly great, but they're quite bad, and they are ruthless. And so I don't see them as being particularly popular people. It's a lot of like fake smiles when the Chultans are dealing with them, and trying to get any deal they can possibly get over them. And this is of course helping drive the the creation of a navy and everything else that I talked about with Tabaxi, and that is because Amn, for all intents and purposes, like it describes in the book that the Chultans are like, oh yeah, we've got our freedom from Amn, we're now we're free, everything else like that. Losing direct control over Port Nyanzaru was a net benefit for Amn. Like there was no downside to it. They're still beholden to Amn for most of their trade. They're still getting most of their goods from Amn, and now Amn doesn't have to pay for protection. They don't have to pay for maintenance. They don't have to pay for governance. Nothing. So, yeah, people are probably not fans of Amn. And then of course there's all the groups from Neverwinter and all sort of Baldur's Gate, all those locations. You've got you've got Fort Balurian and all that sort of thing. You got the Flaming Fists operating, and this is all. I would see them probably. The Chultans would probably view them as being interlopers, especially if you have any. If they have any agency, which is something they lack a lot of in the books. It's like, why aren't the Chultans fighting the undead in the jungle? Why aren't they doing these clearances? Why aren't there like supremely badass, like undead hunters amongst the different tribes now in Chult? I mean, the undead are a huge problem. You'd think they'd develop specialists to deal with it, but unfortunately not. At least not as of yet. So yeah, I think they'd be seen a bit of like as interlopers, but they aren't trying to take any land. They aren't trying to, sort of screw anybody over in trade. So probably generally neutral towards them. And as for like how the Chultans interact with the non-humans of the area, this is where it gets like really awesome. Oh, got a question here. Any idea of Chult's relations with Zakara or other parts of Southern Faerun? In my opinion, because that's a fantastic question. In my opinion, that should be a thing. I have a concept that I call the Radiant South, and this is a subsetting within the Forgotten Realms that is based off of like northern Zakara and the Great Sea region coming through the Shining South and terminating up into Chult and Kalmashan and that sort of the Shar, that sort of region, because it's huge. It's filled with all sorts of groups that should be trading and should be interacting, but that often are lucky if they get a page or two just to give a general description of them. In my opinion, Zakara should be interacting, at least via trade, with Durpar and with the southern parts of Thindol, Samrach, and most likely Omu would have seen some trade with Zakara, either directly or like second or like third party or something like that. Let's see. Yeah, great question. Chult seems so isolationist when everything else about it screams that it should be cosmopolitan. Yeah, exactly. It should be an intensely cosmopolitan region. It's the hook, or like it'd be the equivalent of like the the Cape Colonies in South Africa, all that sort of stuff. It's a major. It would be a major stopping point for groups that are coming from the north and then heading along the southern coast, and groups coming up from the south and going north. And even if you look at the river systems inside of Chult itself, with very little imagination and a little bit of canal digging, you could very easily have a north-south trade route coming up from the southern coast, going right up to Port Nyanzaru. So there's all sorts of potential there that unfortunately was not exploited. Yeah. Back on topic though with the interactions with the non-humans. The way I see their interactions with the non-humans is the Chultans in all of their various descriptions, Eshowe, Tabaxi, Thinguth, none of them have ever been portrayed as being particularly against other groups. I can see them being violently against the Yuan Ti on general principle, based on the long conflict that they've had. I could see them being against, or at least neutral towards, lizard folk, another one of the major groups there, simply because lizard folk were used as mercenaries against the human population there. But a lot of them also fled from the Yuan Ti and set up shop by themselves. So, yeah, I think that there should be. I think that with lizard folk there should be a bit more play there, depending on the history of the characters and the lizard folk population in question. The Aarakocra, good relations. I think those two groups will get along like peas in a pod. In particular because one, they're not competing for land, they're not really competing for resources, and the Aarakocra culture as presented in that region has a really good set of cultural values that match a number of the ones in like all the Chultan groups. So I think that's awesome. Like that is that's a net benefit there. I think they would get along really well. The Patera folk, or Terra folk, however you want to pronounce it, they don't get along with anybody. They were a creation of the Sarak, the same group that made the Yuan Ti and lizard folk and all the other scaled people. And the Terra folk are just awful. Like they're hunters, and they regard humans as a potential food source. So I don't see them getting along particularly well. Dwarves. Okay, I see some really cool potential relationships with the dwarven populations in the area. In particular, the albino dwarves. The albino dwarves and the wild dwarves. When I get In the next episode, where I'm talking about them, they've got a really cool and complicated history that is well worth checking out, especially if you are a fan of playing dwarves or dwarves at all. Awesome deep history there as well. You know, a little bit of speciation happening, and like their Underdark experience, not the same as everybody else's. Arguably more horrific, but again, that's that's for the next episode. But with the albino dwarves in particular, because they had volcano forges, which is something that, at least in the games that I run, if you want to work with adamantite, you have to have that sort of amount of heat available. You know, before the newts, that's what they're called, the magma newts and all that sort of stuff, before they invaded and sort of drove them out of their homes. I could see them as being the major metal producer for Chult, specializing in, you know, alloys and so on that don't corrode. One of which I talked about it on Twitter. I called it Chultan bronze, and it was an alloy of bronze that used, I think it was like 0.2% adamant or something like that, which brought it up to, you know, the standard of steel, except for it doesn't rust because, you know, it's bronze, which, when you're operating in Chult, where apparently it rains constantly because it's a tropical rainforest, steel weapons and iron tools kind of suck at that point because you're going to spend most of your days trying to just keep the rust off. So I see them as having a really deep and long trade connection, and I see it as a huge potential adventure hook there would be assisting the albino dwarves in retaking their volcano forges to get the metal manufacturing, get that metal access going back, get that back up and running, so that they're no longer dependent on groups like Amn and so on to get their get metal. So yeah, lots of cool stuff going on. Like the dwarves, that's going to be I know this is a plug for an episode in the future, but it's going to be a good episode. The dwarves are awesome. Like, I'm not a dwarf fan, and reading about like what happened with dwarves in this area made me into a dwarf fan. Finally, I think we'll finish this off tonight on elves. There's only one group of elves known to be in the area, and those are wild elves. That's it. They came down. They were pushed down by the various like Moon, Dark, and Sun Elf groups back during the Crown Wars, all that sort of thing. Took up residence and never really left. And insofar as I'm able to tell, they actually have a positive relationship with the Chultans, and particularly the Chultans that are living in villages in the jungles, to the point that in the second edition book, there are half elves that you can rescue at one point, and it's mentioned that they are like half Chultan and half elf, and half Chultan human and half elf, and then later you find that it's only wild elves in the area, and so I think that's pretty cool. Of course, wild elves, there's lots of opportunity to do stuff with them. I mean, Chult is pretty much the ultimate location to have a wilderness-based elf group that just wants to chill out and relax. There are dinosaurs, there are giant trees, all sorts of stuff. I mean, you could even put them out into the swampier areas and have them living up in the trees and have them in a symbiotic relationship with the lizard folk, where they protect the lizard folk from aerial threats and stuff, and they just do stuff up in the trees, and the lizard folk prevent their trees from being chopped down, you know, or damaged. It's win-win. Both groups are doing great. So yeah, that brings us up to the end of episode 1 of Lore Diver. Thank you very much for listening. We've talked about humans and specifically the background of the Chultan human groups in Chult. I hope everybody's enjoyed listening to this and has had an opportunity to sort of like, you know, get a little more excited about the area than you may have been in before. All right. If you liked it, please subscribe. Please check out my blog, POCGamer.com, and have a great night.